Boating history loves to celebrate the legends. But hiding in the shadows are the misfires, engines that stranded fishermen, emptied wallets, and made mechanics rich. Here's the dark side of marine power, the 12 worst engines the industry would rather you forget. When OMC rolled out the Ficht direct injection outboards in the late 1990s, the hype was enormous. Cleaner emissions, better fuel economy, and modern power in an outboard that looked set to dominate the new century. Instead, the first generation 150 to 225 horsepower Fichts quickly turned into a disaster that some say sank the company. The problem wasn't one flaw, it was many. Injectors that failed without warning, oil delivery issues that starved cylinders, and powerheads that grenaded themselves in under 100 hours. Owners who'd spent big on the new tech often found themselves limping back to the dock under trolling motor power. One Florida guide still laughs about the time he had a boat full of paying customers and ended up rowing after the Ficht blew up mid-run. His laughter comes only now. At the time, it nearly cost him his business. The warranty claims stacked up faster than OMC could pay them. Dealers were overwhelmed with angry customers, and word spread fast on the docks. By 2000, OMC filed for bankruptcy, and many insiders put the blame squarely on the failed Ficht rollout. BRP eventually took over and improved the design, but by then the brand's reputation had collapsed. Even today, first-gen Ficht is a phrase that makes boaters cringe. It wasn't just a bad engine, it was the one that dragged down an entire marine giant. If one engine could take down a whole company, just wait for the next ones. The failures only get worse. Stay with us, subscribe now, and see which disasters history tried to bury. Mercury's Optimax was their answer to Yamaha and OMC in the direct injection wars. The early 135 to 225 horsepower models launched in 1997 promised efficiency and torque, but the real-world story was far messier. The main headache was the compressor-driven air system, a clever idea that proved fragile in practice. When the compressor worked, the Optimax could deliver smooth, efficient performance. When it failed, and it often did, owners were left adrift. Add in injector troubles, and mechanics suddenly had a steady stream of Optimax rebuilds on their benches. Tournament anglers tell stories about carrying spare compressors in their trucks just to make it through a weekend. One joked that Mercury should have bundled each Optimax with a free towboat subscription. The engines could run brilliantly when everything held together, but too often they didn't. By the early 2000s, Mercury ironed out the kinks, and later Optimax models built a loyal following, with some lasting thousands of hours. But the early versions had already given the name a black eye. To this day, old-timers hear first-gen Optimax and shake their heads. It was a harsh reminder that rushing tech to market can do more harm than waiting until it's ready. In the early 2000s, Yamaha could do no wrong. Their reputation was built on bulletproof two-strokes and rock-solid four-strokes. So when they unveiled the 250 HPDI, a high-pressure direct injection V6, everyone expected another legend. Instead, Yamaha delivered one of its rare misfires. The 3.1-liter HPDI quickly became notorious for burning pistons, inconsistent oil delivery, and sudden powerhead failures. Boaters who thought they'd bought the most reliable engine on the water found themselves stranded far offshore. Yamaha scrambled with service bulletins and updates, but the bad press was already spreading. One offshore captain remembers the day one of his twin HPDIs blew at full speed, forcing him to limp home on the other. He later said the only thing high pressure about the engine was the stress it gave him every time he turned the key. Mechanics piled on, dubbing the series Handy Parts Disposal Items, a nickname that stuck in service shops across the coast. To be fair, plenty of HPDIs ran fine, and some owners swear by them to this day. But there were enough failures to tarnish the entire line. For a company that built its name on reliability, the 250 HPDI was a stumble Yamaha would rather erase. It remains a cautionary tale that even the best can get it wrong. When Yamaha introduced the F225 in 2000, it was hailed as the future of offshore boating. A quiet, smooth four-stroke V6 with plenty of torque, designed to rack up thousands of hours. Unfortunately, the first-generation F225 TXR carried a hidden flaw that turned it into one of Yamaha's most infamous missteps: the dry exhaust midsection corrosion problem. Deep inside the exhaust housing, saltwater intrusion caused unseen corrosion. Owners thought they had reliable motors until, one day, the housing gave way, leading to compression loss, seized pistons, or complete engine failure. The worst part: many failures struck at under 1,000 hours, far less than Yamaha's legendary standards. The repair bills were brutal. One Carolina charter captain said he spent more on replacing corroded F225s than he did on bait and fuel combined. His customers started asking if he was cursed because every season seemed to bring another dead Yamaha. Yamaha eventually fixed the issue in later designs, but the early F225 remains a cautionary tale. On the used market, mechanics still warn buyers to check serial numbers and midsections before handing over cash. The F225 should have been Yamaha's proud showcase of four-stroke dominance. Instead, it's remembered as the engine that made even loyal Yamaha fans hesitate. The Yamaha F350 was a showstopper when it launched, the first ever V8 production outboard, and the first to break 300 horsepower. With 5.3 liters of displacement and 350 horsepower on tap, it was marketed as the ultimate power for big offshore rigs. But within a few years, it had earned a very different reputation. Early F350s suffered from chronic flywheel and ECM issues, tied to harmonic vibrations at specific RPM ranges. Yamaha even instituted a 250-hour flywheel replacement schedule, essentially admitting that the core of their flagship engine was wearing out far too fast. For boat owners, that meant shelling out thousands just to keep their shiny new V8s running. One offshore angler joked that every time he pushed the throttles forward, he imagined hearing a cash register dinging in the background. Others swapped their F350s out early, trading down to the more reliable F300 just to regain some peace of mind. Yamaha improved later models, and by the mid-2000s the F350 had redeemed itself. But the early run was enough to tarnish the name. Instead of being remembered as a flawless milestone, the first F350s are recalled as beautiful but flawed, an ambitious leap that stumbled out of the gate. 5 down, and the list is only heating up. The next engines didn't just fail quietly, they stranded boaters and scarred entire brands. Stay tuned, subscribe now, and see which mistakes nearly sank reputations forever. The MerCruiser 470 seemed clever at first. Take half of a Ford 460 V8, adapt it into a lightweight inline 4, and drop it into affordable stern drive packages. On paper, it looked like a winner. In practice, it became one of Mercury's most ridiculed experiments. Unique parts like the water-cooled alternator and an odd charging system turned into chronic failure points. Add in persistent overheating, weak head gaskets, and cracked manifolds, and you had an engine that constantly kept mechanics busy. Finding replacement parts often felt like a treasure hunt in a scrapyard, and not the fun kind. Owners soon realized the MerCruiser 470 wasn't a bargain. It was a liability. One restorer remembered a customer laughing when told repairs would cost thousands, saying, "Forget it, just tow it to the dump." Another mechanic quipped that the 470's most reliable feature was its ability to overheat at the worst possible moment. Mercury pulled the plug in 1989, but thousands had already been sold. Many still linger in older boats, tempting unsuspecting buyers with cheap price tags. Veterans know better. For anyone who's been burned, the 470 isn't an engine, it's a warning sign in cast iron. Detroit Diesel's 71 and 92 series engines were legendary. They powered everything from tugboats to buses and had a reputation for running forever. Then came the 8.2-liter fuel pincher. Marketed as a lighter, more efficient four-stroke V8 in the 1980s, it quickly gained a reputation for being the black sheep of the Detroit lineup. On paper, it looked promising. In reality, the 8.2 was fragile. Cracked heads, warped blocks, and oiling issues were constant complaints. Marine conversions fared even worse. Boats demand steady torque at heavy loads, something the 8.2 simply couldn't deliver. Owners expecting Detroit toughness found themselves stranded instead. Mechanics despised them. One said he never saw two 8.2s fail the same way, because there were so many different weak points. Another joked that fuel pincher was misleading. The only thing it pinched was your wallet. Compared to the bulletproof Detroits that came before, the 8.2 was an embarrassment. Most were retired early, replaced with Cummins or Cats, and today they're little more than a bad memory. For Detroit Diesel, it's the engine they'd rather erase from the history books. Cummins has a rock-solid reputation, thanks to engines like the 6BT, but the VT555, nicknamed the Triple Nickel, was the exception. This 555 cubic inch V8 was marketed in the 1970s and 80s as a compact alternative for boats and trucks. What it delivered instead was disappointment. The VT555 struggled with weak oiling systems and chronic overheating. In marine applications, where engines face long stretches of heavy load, failures were almost inevitable. Mechanics complained that the blocks couldn't take sustained stress, and torque output was unimpressive for the size. One captain remembered his 555 spending more time tied up than turning a prop. Another mechanic quipped that the only Cummins part of the engine was the badge on the cover. It didn't help that parts quickly became scarce, making even routine repairs feel like restoration projects. Owners who expected Cummins' toughness were left frustrated, and many repowered long before the 555's supposed service life. Compared to the company's legendary 6 cylinders, the Triple Nickel was a black eye. Today, it lives on as a cautionary tale, proof that even Cummins had a flop. When Chrysler's Marine division folded, U.S. Marine rebranded leftover designs as Force outboards, aiming at budget buyers. The Force L drive, especially the 125 horsepower model, was pitched as simple and affordable. What it actually delivered was one of the strangest, least loved engines of its time. The concept was odd, an outboard-style powerhead mated to a stern drive-like leg. In theory, it blended the best of both worlds. In practice, it combined the worst. Fragile lower units, underwhelming performance, and scarce replacement parts quickly doomed the design. Owners discovered that when something broke, and it usually did, repairs often cost more than the motor itself. Dealers dreaded them too, knowing each sale was likely to end in warranty headaches. One mechanic joked that Force L drives had the resale value of a broken lawnmower. Another said working on them felt like punishment, not a paycheck. The L-Drive tried to be clever, but instead it became a cautionary tale. Instead of saving owners money, it wasted their time and drained their wallets. Today, it's remembered less as an engine and more as a mistake. We're closing in on the final 3, and these aren't just bad engines, they're infamous. The kind boaters still warn each other about. Stick around, hit subscribe, and discover the worst of the worst. Suzuki's 4-stroke outboards are generally well regarded, but the first-generation DF140 became infamous for a design flaw that caused oil pan and engine holder corrosion. In saltwater environments, hidden rust silently ate away at the steel components until the oil pan failed. Some engines dumped their oil into the bilge with little warning, stranding owners who thought they had years of life left. Stories of DF140 heartbreak litter boating forums. One Florida mechanic said he could spot the look on a customer's face before he even delivered the diagnosis. Another joked that Suzuki should have included bilge pads in the box. The flaw often appeared at relatively low hours, which made it sting even more. A motor that should have been mid-career was suddenly facing a teardown or replacement worth thousands. Suzuki eventually corrected the problem in later generations, but by then, the early DF140 had earned a bad reputation. For buyers shopping used Suzukis today, it's the model old-timers will tell you to skip. The DF140 should have been a dependable mid-range option. Instead, it became a reminder that even strong brands have weak spots. Honda's brand has long been tied to reliability, both on the road and on the water. But the first-generation BF130A was a major stumble. Introduced in the late 1990s, it was based on a car-derived block and looked bulletproof on paper. In reality, it struggled with cracked blocks, faulty main relays, and corrosion issues. The block cracks were the most devastating. Often they appeared just after warranties expired, leaving owners with an engine worth less than the cost of repairing it. Mechanics dreaded breaking the news. Telling a Honda loyalist their bulletproof outboard was toast was never fun. One charter captain said he added a kicker motor after his BF130A quit mid-trip one too many times. Another mechanic remembered shaking his head as yet another BF130A rolled into the shop with a split block. Later revisions solved the issues, but the damage to reputation was already done. Today, the BF130A is remembered as the Honda that didn't live up to the badge, a reminder that even the most trusted brands can fumble badly. Caterpillar is usually a name tied to rugged reliability. But the 3126B proved that even big cats have weak spots. Certain production runs were plagued with what owners called soft blocks, poor metallurgy that led to premature wear. The aftercoolers were another problem. Corrosion and leaks could cause catastrophic damage, sometimes taking down engines at relatively low hours. Yacht owners expecting decades of service were instead budgeting for rebuilds long before they should have. One mechanic admitted he saw more low-hour 3126Bs fail than any other Caterpillar marine engine. An owner joked that his big cat behaved more like a lazy house cat, napping in the shop instead of roaring offshore. Caterpillar corrected the problems in the C7 that followed, but the 3126B's reputation stuck. Today, brokers still advise buyers to check serial numbers carefully before buying a boat powered by them. For Cat, the 3126B wasn't just a weak product, it was a blemish on a brand that rarely makes mistakes. So there you have it, 12 engines that remind us not every design deserves a legacy. Some promised breakthroughs but delivered breakdowns. Others were doomed from the start, cursed by bad engineering, poor materials, or rushed launches. For the boaters who owned them, these weren't just engines. They were headaches, heartbreaks, and in some cases financial disasters. But here's the thing, Even the worst engines teach us something. They pushed companies to do better, to rebuild their reputations, and to refine designs into the reliable power plants we celebrate today. Without the failures, maybe we wouldn't have the legends. So the next time you see a dusty MerCruiser 470 in the classifieds, or hear someone whisper about the dreaded first-gen Ficht, remember, some chapters of boating history aren't written in gold. They're written in smoke, seized pistons, and broken promises. And that's why these 12 engines truly belong on the list of those history tried to erase.